In the heartland of Nebraska, a deadly mistake is about to unfold. The Devils Horde motorcycle gang thinks they've found another easy target, just a quiet farmer tending his crops in Cedar Valley. They couldn't be more wrong. Michael Reeves isn't your average farmer. For 20 years, he was the FBI's deadliest tactical commander, the man who brought down America's most dangerous criminal organizations. His codename was Shadow, because targets never saw him coming until it was too late. When the Devil's Horde begins terrorizing his farming community, they don't realize they're walking into a trap set by a master of psychological warfare. What follows is the story of how one man will dismantle the most violent biker gang in the Midwest, using nothing but a modest farm, tactical brilliance, and skills that never faded. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted Cedar Valley in shades of gold as Michael Reeves began his morning routine. He'd been up since 4:30 a.m., same as every day for the past 3 years since buying the farm. Old habits died hard, especially ones forged over 2 decades of tactical operations. The farmhouse sat back from the road, positioned with clear sight lines in all directions, a coincidence most would say, but Michael had spent weeks finding the perfect property. His nearest neighbor, Sarah Miller, and her daughter Emily lived half a mile down the dusty road, just close enough to keep an eye on, far enough for tactical advantage. He checked his security cameras, disguised as ordinary farm equipment, before stepping onto the porch. The morning air carried the scent of ripening corn and freshly turned earth. To any observer, he looked like just another farmer starting his day. They wouldn't notice how his eyes automatically scanned the tree line, or how he always kept his back to a wall. The barn needed attention first. Michael approached it with the same methodical precision he'd once used clearing buildings in hostage situations. Inside, rows of farming equipment stood in perfect order. Every tool had its place, every machine positioned for quick access. Behind, the ordinary farm implements, hidden compartments, held different kinds of tools, the kind he'd hoped never to need again. Sarah's pickup truck appeared on the horizon, right on schedule. She drove past every morning on her way to the local diner, where she worked. Michael raised his hand in greeting, noting how she'd started slowing down more often lately. The community had accepted him gradually, but Sarah had been the first to welcome him without question. "Morning, Michael," she called out, her daughter Emily waving from the passenger seat. "Still coming by for coffee later?" "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, smiling. The diner had become part of his routine too. Another habit, but this one about maintaining connections rather than operational security. Though he couldn't help noticing, it also offered an excellent vantage point of the main street. After they drove away, Michael returned to his morning checks. The property's perimeter fence looked ordinary enough, but sensors monitored every inch. The irrigation system could be converted to area denial in minutes. Even his scarecrow contained a high-resolution camera. 3 years of peace had softened some of his edges, but not his instincts. He still maintained go-bags in strategic locations, still kept escape routes clear and vehicles ready, still practiced at the hidden range he'd built in his north field, disguised as an equipment shed. Some mornings, like this one, he wondered if he was being paranoid. Cedar Valley hadn't seen serious trouble in decades. The biggest excitement was usually someone's cow getting loose or teenagers sneaking into Old Man Peterson's apple orchard. But Michael had learned the hard way that trouble always came eventually, usually to the quietest places, the most peaceful communities. He'd seen it happen too many times during his FBI career, criminals targeting small towns because they looked vulnerable. He finished his morning inspection and headed inside to make coffee. The kitchen, like everything else, was organized with military precision. From his favorite spot at the counter, he could see both approaches to the house while appearing to simply enjoy his breakfast. The local news played quietly on his tablet. Something about motorcycle gangs causing trouble 2 counties over. Michael noted it automatically, the same way he noted everything that might indicate potential threats. Just another habit he couldn't break. Sarah had asked him once why he'd chosen Cedar Valley. He'd told her he wanted peace and quiet after a busy career in law enforcement. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. He just hadn't mentioned what kind of law enforcement or why he'd specifically chosen a property with such excellent defensive positions. The morning sun climbed higher as Michael finished his coffee. Time to start the real farm work. He enjoyed it more than he'd expected. The physical labor, the satisfaction of watching things grow, the simple rhythm of agricultural life. It had helped heal something in him that 20 years of violence had damaged. But underneath the peaceful farmer, exterior, shadow still lurked, still watched, still stayed ready just in case. The afternoon sun beat down on Michael's back as he worked in the cornfield. His hands, once used primarily for handling weapons and tactical gear, had grown calloused from farm tools. Sometimes he caught himself checking sightlines between the corn rows or calculating cover positions, old instincts that never quite faded. Sarah's diner sat at the heart of Cedar Valley, a gathering place where farmers shared news and gossip over endless cups of coffee. Michael chose his usual corner booth, the one with clear views of both the entrance and the street. Sarah brought his coffee without asking. "You missed the excitement this morning," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Some fancy government types were asking questions at the sheriff's office. Black SUVs, suits, the whole show. Michael kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced through possibilities. What kind of questions? Something about motorcycle gangs moving into the region. Sheriff Thompson seemed pretty worried. Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice. They mentioned the Devils Horde specifically. Bad bunch, from what I hear. Michael nodded, remembering intelligence briefings from his FBI days. The Devils Horde had started as a typical outlaw motorcycle club, but had evolved into something more dangerous. Drug trafficking, extortion, violence for hire. He'd almost crossed paths with them during an operation in Texas, before they'd moved their activities north. "Just what we need," he muttered, more to himself than Sarah. "At least we've got our own law enforcement expert." Sarah smiled. "Even if he prefers growing corn these days." Michael forced a laugh. Sarah, like everyone else, thought he'd been a regular FBI agent, just another federal cop who'd traded his badge for a simpler life. Nobody in Cedar Valley knew about the classified operations, the specialized tactical unit he'd commanded, the missions that still haunted his dreams. The diner's bell chimed as Sheriff Thompson entered. The local lawman looked tired, his usually crisp uniform wrinkled. He spotted Michael and headed over. "Mind if I join you?" Thompson didn't wait for an answer. "Could use your input on something, given your background." Michael gestured to the empty seat. Thompson had been one of the few people to check his cover story when he'd first arrived. The sheriff had enough contacts to verify that Michael had indeed been FBI, but not enough to access the classified details. "These bikers," Thompson began, "they're different from your typical troublemakers. Professional, organized. They've been systematically taking over small farming communities across 3 states. They find vulnerable areas, create problems, then offer protection in exchange for using the farms for their operations." Michael listened, recognizing the pattern. It was the same methodology drug cartels used in Mexico, just adapted for the American Midwest. Create a problem, then present yourself as the solution. Local law enforcement can't handle them, Thompson continued. They've got someone warning them about raids, helping them stay one step ahead, almost like they've got tactical training. Probably. Ex-military, Michael suggested, careful to sound casual. Lots of veterans join motorcycle clubs. Yeah, probably, Thompson sighed. Just wish we had someone with experience handling this kind of threat. You sure you don't miss the old days? Michael thought about the hidden room in his barn. the equipment. He maintained, but hoped never to use again. "Those days are behind me," he said. "I'm just a farmer now." The sheriff nodded, clearly disappointed. "Well, if you think of anything that might help." After Thompson left, Sarah brought fresh coffee. "You know," she said quietly, "sometimes I wonder if there's more to your story than you let on. The way you move, the way you're always aware of everything around you. You're different from other ex-feds I've met." Michael met her gaze. For a moment, he considered telling her the truth. About Shadow, about the unit he'd commanded, about why he really chose Cedar Valley. Instead, he smiled and changed the subject. But as he drove home that evening, Michael found himself planning, analyzing potential threats, identifying defensive positions, calculating response scenarios, just in case, because he knew better than anyone. The past never stays buried when trouble comes looking for you. Michael's security cameras picked up the first motorcycle at dawn. A single rider, moving slowly past his property, taking photos with a long-lens camera. To anyone else, it might have looked like someone admiring the farmland. But Michael recognized reconnaissance when he saw it. He reviewed the footage while drinking his morning coffee. The rider's posture showed military training, the way he maintained awareness of his surroundings, how he kept one hand near his vest, not some random biker tourist. Sarah's truck pulled up his driveway an hour early, gravel crunching under her. Tires. Her face was tight with worry as she hurried to his porch. "They're at the diner," she said without preamble. "4 of them. Devils Horde patches. They're asking questions about local farms, property values, who owns what." Michael nodded, his tactical mind already mapping possibilities. "How are they acting?" "Professional. Polite even. That's what's scary. They're not like regular bikers." One of them knew military terms when he was talking to Pete, the veteran who runs the gas station. Through his kitchen window, Michael spotted 2 more motorcycles passing slowly on the main road. Different riders, same mission. They were mapping the area, establishing patterns, identifying key locations. Sheriff Thompson tried talking to them, Sarah continued. They showed him paperwork for some kind of legitimate business venture, said they're looking to invest in agricultural properties. Let me guess, they're offering cash deals, well above market value. Sarah's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "It's a standard pattern." Michael kept his voice casual, hiding how his mind was shifting into operational analysis. "They establish legitimate cover first, make everything look legal and proper. More motorcycles appeared throughout the morning. Always in pairs, always looking professional. They visited the bank, the real estate office, the county clerk, building their intelligence picture of Cedar Valley. Michael spent the afternoon in his barn, checking equipment he'd hoped never to need. His hidden cache included surveillance gear, communications equipment, and other tools from his FBI days. He methodically verified each item's functionality. The burner phone he kept for emergencies had 3 missed calls from former colleagues. They knew about the Devils Horde moving into the region. Word traveled fast in certain circles. Sheriff Thompson's patrol car pulled up just before sunset. The local lawman looked more worried than ever. "Just had an interesting conversation with the FBI," Thompson said, declining Michael's offer of coffee. "Seems these bikers have some heavy connections. They've got someone running interference whenever law enforcement tries to move against them. Someone who knows how we operate." "Inside knowledge?" Michael asked, though he already suspected the answer. "They think the gang's got an ex-federal tactical advisor, someone who knows how to counter law enforcement operations." Thompson studied Michael's face. "Made me think of you, actually. Not many ex-feds in farm country." "I was just a regular agent," Michael lied smoothly. "Nothing special." After Thompson left, Michael walked his property line. His trained eye noted at least 3 more surveillance passes by gang members, all maintaining professional distance, all showing tactical awareness. Sarah called as darkness fell. "They bought the Henderson place," she said without greeting. Paid cash, triple market value. Old man Henderson couldn't refuse, not with his wife's medical bills. Michael's jaw tightened. The Henderson farm bordered his property to the north. It offered perfect overwatch positions of the entire valley. There's something else, Sarah added, her voice dropping. Emily overheard them at the diner. They're not just buying farms. They're targeting specific properties, creating a corridor through the county. She paused. Michael, your farm was on their list. Thanks for letting me know. He kept his voice calm, not wanting to worry her further. After hanging up, Michael stood on his porch watching the sunset. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, nature matching his mood. In his mind, he was already plotting defensive positions, mapping fields of fire, calculating response scenarios. The Devils Horde was coming. They thought they were dealing with a simple farmer, an easy target. But for the first time in 3 years, Shadow was awake and planning. They had no idea what kind of storm was about to break over Cedar Valley. The Devils Horde made their first direct move on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. 3 black SUVs and 6 motorcycles rolled up Michael's driveway in perfect formation. Their approach formation told him everything he needed to know. Vehicles positioned. For quick exit, riders maintaining tactical spacing. This wasn't just a gang, this was a trained unit. Michael watched through his kitchen window, noting faces and positions. The leader stepped out of the central SUV, tall, muscular, with the bearing of someone used to command. 2 teardrop tattoos under his left eye suggested time served. The way he moved screamed military background. Mr. Reeves, the leader's voice, carried across the yard. Name's Marcus Kane. Hope you don't mind us dropping by for a friendly chat about your property. Michael stepped onto his porch, deliberately keeping his stance relaxed. His tactical assessment continued automatically. 12 men total, all armed under their leather vests, positioned to control every angle of approach. Beautiful land you've got here, Kane continued, climbing the porch steps. His smile didn't reach his eyes. We're looking to invest in local agriculture. Your farm would be perfect for our needs. Not interested in selling, Michael replied. Simply Kane's smile tightened. Maybe we should discuss numbers first. We're prepared to offer 3 times market value. Cash deal, no questions asked. Still not interested. 2 more bikers moved to flank the porch. They were trying to subtly establish dominance through positioning. Michael noticed their hand positions, their practiced movements. These weren't common thugs. Mr. Reeves, Kane's voice hardened slightly. Sometimes opportunities like this don't come around twice. Smart men take the first offer. Michael met Kane's gaze. For a moment, Shadow stirred in him, recognizing another predator. He carefully suppressed the instinct to respond to the threat. My answer's still no. Kane studied him for a long moment. You know, it's funny. Most folks, they get nervous when we visit. But you haven't even blinked. His hand rested casually near his vest, almost like you're used to tense situations. I'm just a farmer, Michael said mildly. See, I don't think you are. There's something about you. Kane stepped closer. The way you stand. The way you've been tracking all my men's positions since we arrived. That's not farmer behavior. Michael kept his face neutral, but internally he cursed himself for letting his training show. If there's nothing else, sure, we'll go. But think about our offer. Kane's smile turned cold. Farming can be dangerous work. Equipment failures, barn fires. Lots of things can go wrong out here all alone. As they drove away, Michael watched their departure formation. Perfect spacing, maintained awareness, professional discipline. In his FBI days, he'd have been impressed. Now, it just confirmed his fears about what was coming. Sarah's truck appeared as the dust settled. I saw them leaving, she said, hurrying up to his porch. Are you okay? What did they want? Just a property offer, Michael replied, still watching the road. That didn't look like just a property offer. Sarah's voice shook slightly. Emily said 2 more farms got visits today. The Petersons and the Walkers. Both signed over their land. After being shown photos of their grandchildren at school, Michael's jaw tightened. The Devils Horde was moving faster than he'd expected, escalating straight to threats. They were establishing dominance over the community through fear. Just like he'd seen cartels do 100 times before. "Michael?" Sarah touched his arm. "What are we going to do?" He looked down at her hand, then back to the road where his visitors had disappeared. For 3 years he'd been just a farmer. Now Shadow was fully awake, analyzing threats, calculating responses, planning counter-moves. "Don't worry," he said, quietly. "I won't let them hurt anyone." He just hoped he could keep that promise without revealing what he really was. The Devils Horde worked with methodical precision. Within 3 days, they'd established a pattern that Michael recognized from his FBI days. Systematic intimidation designed to break a community's will to resist. It started with small things. The local bank suddenly found regulatory issues with farm loans. The equipment repair shop had parts delayed indefinitely. Feed deliveries began arriving spoiled or not at all. Michael documented everything from his corner booth at Sarah's diner. 4 more farms had sold out after accidents convinced their owners to leave. The Henderson place had been transformed into the gang's local headquarters, complete with armed security and surveillance equipment. "They're watching the school now," Sarah whispered, sliding into his booth. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured his coffee. "Emily says men on motorcycles follow the buses, taking photos of the kids." Through the window, Michael spotted 2 of Kane's men walking into the hardware store. Their tactical vests barely concealed their weapons. Behind them, an elderly farmer quickly crossed the street to avoid their path. Sheriff Thompson tried. "Calling the state police," Sarah continued. "His calls won't go through. Someone's blocking him." "They've got people inside the system," Michael replied, recognizing the tactics. "Probably compromised some officials." A black SUV cruised past. The diner, moving slowly. Michael caught a glimpse of Kane in the passenger seat, watching. Their eyes met briefly through the window. "Walker's barn burned down last night." Sarah's voice cracked. "Fire department was delayed responding. By the time they arrived, nothing left. Endurance is claiming it was faulty wiring." Michael's jaw tightened. The Walkers had refused to sell 3 days ago. The message was clear: cooperate or face escalating consequences. Sheriff Thompson's deputy burst through the diner door, face pale. "They've got the sheriff. Kane's men just arrested him on corruption charges. FBI agents took him away." "Those weren't real FBI," Michael said quietly, recognizing another classic tactic. "Remove legitimate authority, replace it with your own people." The deputy looked lost. "What do we do? They've got judges signing warrants, government agencies backing them. It's like they've taken over everything." Through the window, Michael watched. More motorcycles arrive. The gang was establishing a visible presence, making sure everyone saw their growing power. Their operational security was impressive, exactly how he would have done it in his FBI days. Sarah touched his arm. "Michael, they're saying your farm is next. Kane announced it at the bar last night, said he's going to make an example of you." The old Michael, Shadow, would have already launched a counter-operation, but that would mean revealing capabilities he'd worked hard to hide. People would get hurt. Lines would have to be crossed. His phone vibrated. A text from an unlisted number. "Final warning. Take the offer. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Michael deleted the message, his decision already made. He'd hidden his true nature for 3 years, played the simple farmer, kept Shadow locked away. But watching his community being systematically torn apart had awakened something he couldn't ignore. Kane's SUV passed by again, slower this time. The gang leader's message was clear: surrender or face the consequences. "Whatever happens," Michael told Sarah quietly, "keep Emily home from school tomorrow." She studied his face. "You're going to do something, aren't you? Something besides farming?" Michael didn't answer. But as he walked home that evening, his mind was already shifting into operational mode. Planning, analyzing, preparing. The Devils Horde had drawn their lines in the sand. Now it was time to show them they'd picked the wrong farmer to threaten. Michael waited until midnight before opening the hidden room beneath his barn floor. The space smelled of oil and metal, untouched for 3 years but meticulously maintained. Old habits died hard. The cache wasn't just weapons and tactical gear. Those were easy to get. What made this collection special was the surveillance equipment, the specialized electronics, the kind of tools that weren't supposed to exist outside of federal agencies. He laid everything out methodically, muscle memory taking over as he checked each piece. Surveillance cameras with thermal imaging, communications interceptors, sound, amplification systems that could pick up conversations from half a mile away. His phone vibrated, a secure message from an old contact still active in the bureau. Your visitors have friends in high places. CIA connections, former special ops, watch yourself. That explained their level of sophistication. Kane wasn't just some gang leader. He was running a professional operation with government-trained personnel. Michael began moving equipment into pre-selected positions around his property. Each camera and sensor had to be perfectly concealed, professionally camouflaged. By dawn, he'd have eyes and ears on every approach. His tactical vest felt familiar as he worked, like greeting an old friend. Shadow was fully awake now, analyzing angles, calculating fields of fire, establishing defensive positions. The farm's layout, so carefully chosen 3 years ago, was about to prove its worth. A motorcycle's engine growled in the distance, Kane's men making their regular patrol. Michael froze in the shadows, watching through his night vision scope as 2 riders passed. Their formation was precise, their scanning patterns professional, definitely military-trained. The burner phone vibrated again. Local police compromised. State police blocked. They've got someone running interference at federal level. You're on your own, Michael smiled grimly. He'd always worked better alone anyway. By 3 a.m., his surveillance network was operational. Screens in the barn's hidden room showed thermal images of the entire property. Directional microphones picked up conversations from the Henderson place, where Kane's men were discussing tomorrow's operations. The farmers got to go. Kane's voice came through clearly. He's giving others ideas about resistance. Make it look like an accident. Professional. Michael recorded everything. Not that evidence would matter. They had too many officials in their pocket. This was about gathering intelligence, understanding their patterns, finding weaknesses. Vehicle approached down his driveway. Sarah's truck. He'd told her to stay away, but she was as stubborn as she was loyal. "You're preparing for something," she said, as he met her at the barn door. It wasn't a question. "I saw the lights moving. Around your property, too steady for fireflies, too precise for random movement." "You shouldn't be here," he replied, but invited her in anyway. She'd already seen too much to maintain his cover. Her eyes widened at the equipment laid out on his workbench. "This isn't standard FBI gear." "No," he admitted. "It's not." "Who are you really, Michael?" He considered his answer carefully. "Someone who used to solve problems like this. Someone who tried to retire." Sarah picked up one of the surveillance photos showing Kane's men. "They're going to come for you. Soon." "I know." He checked another monitor showing thermal images of motorcycles gathering at the Henderson place. "That's what I'm counting on." "You're going to fight them?" Her voice held more curiosity than fear. "No," Michael replied, watching the screens. "I'm going to destroy them, systematically, professionally, using everything they taught me in 20 years of taking down organizations exactly like this." Sarah studied his face, seeing shadow for the first time. "You're not just some ex-FBI agent, are you?" "Get Emily somewhere safe," he said instead of answering. Things are about to get complicated in Cedar Valley. After she left, Michael returned to his preparations. On the monitors, more motorcycles arrived at the Henderson place. Kane was mobilizing his forces, preparing to deal with the stubborn farmer who dared to resist. They had no idea they were walking into a trap 3 years in the making. The Devils Horde made their move just before midnight. Michael watched through his surveillance system as 3 vehicles and 8 motorcycles approached his farm. Their formation was perfect. Tactical spacing, overlapping fields of fire, professional. "Discipline! Last chance, Reeves!" Kane's voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "Come out and we keep this civil!" Michael moved silently through his darkened house. His night vision gear showed him Kane's men taking positions around the property. 2 snipers moving toward pre-selected positions. 4 men approaching the barn. Kane himself directing from his SUV. They were good, but they were fighting on his ground. The first trap triggered when the snipers reached their chosen perches. Hidden speakers suddenly blasted recorded gunfire from multiple directions, throwing their tactical formation into chaos. In the confusion, Michael's automated systems killed their night vision with precisely timed strobes. "We've got movement!" a biker shouted, firing at shadows. Michael's voice came from speakers scattered across the property. 18 armed men on my land. Multiple weapons violations. Conspiracy to commit assault. You're not as clean as you think you are, Kane. "Find him," Kane ordered, but his men were already rattled. Their professional spacing began to break down as Michael's recordings created the illusion of movement from multiple directions. "Nice tactical gear," Michael's voice continued conversationally. "Not standard biker equipment. Wonder what the FBI would think about ex-CIA operators running a criminal enterprise." Kane's response was immediate. "Burn it all. Burn him out." 4 men approached the house with Molotov cocktails. They never saw the thin wires at ankle height. The resulting falls and crashes would have been comical if they weren't so precisely calculated. "Sloppy." Michael's voice came from a different direction. "Your military training's showing, Kane, making mistakes under pressure." A sniper fired at the voice's source, only to have his position instantly revealed by Michael's thermal imaging. A focused sonic pulse from a hidden speaker sent the man stumbling from his perch. "Who the hell is this guy?" someone shouted. Michael moved through the shadows, systematically separating and isolating Kane's men. Each piece of equipment they'd brought, night vision, tactical radios, infrared sensors, was turned against them through countermeasures he'd spent years perfecting. "Fall back!" Kane ordered, finally recognizing the trap. "Regroup at the road!" Running. Already, Michael's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "But we're just getting started. Let's talk about your CIA contacts, your political protection, the judges you've bought." Kane fired his automatic weapon at another shadow. "You're dead, Reeves. You hear me? Dead." "You should have done better. Research," Michael replied calmly. "About this farm, about me, about why no one's ever successfully attacked this position in 3 years." The Devils Horde tried to retreat in formation, but their professional discipline was cracking. They'd come to terrorize a simple farmer. Instead, they'd walked into an expertly crafted kill zone. "Next time you come back," Michael's voice followed their retreat, "I won't be so gentle. That was just a demonstration." Kane's SUV spun out on the gravel road, nearly hitting 2 of his own motorcycles. In minutes, the property was clear, except for dropped weapons and scattered tactical gear. Michael watched them flee through his thermal imaging. Their formation was ragged now, their confidence shattered, but he knew this wasn't over. Kane wouldn't let this humiliation stand. Sarah's message came through on his secure line. "Just saw them tear past the diner. What did you do?" "Gave them something to think about," he replied. "Police scanners going crazy. They're calling in every contact they have." Michael began collecting the equipment Kane's men had dropped. Good quality stuff. Military grade, just like his intelligence suggested. "Get some sleep," he told Sarah. "Tomorrow's going to be interesting." She was quiet for a moment. "You're not just fighting them, are you? You're drawing them in, making them angry." "They're professionals playing at being bikers," Michael explained. "Tonight I dented their pride. Now they'll have to respond, have to prove themselves. Isn't that dangerous?" Michael smiled in the darkness. Only for them. He spent the rest of the night strengthening his defenses. The Devils Horde would be back, probably with reinforcements. Kane would have recognized some of his countermeasures, known they were dealing with someone who had serious federal training. The simple farmer act was over. Now it was time to show them exactly who they were. Dealing with. Morning brought black government SUVs to Cedar Valley. Not Kane's vehicles, these were genuine federal agents. Michael watched them through his surveillance system as they interviewed witnesses about last night's confrontation. His secure phone lit up with a message from his old handler. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest. Kane's got friends asking questions. Shadow Protocol is still active. Stay dark. Shadow Protocol." Michael hadn't heard that phrase in 3 years, not since his last mission went sideways. The operation that made him walk away from everything. Sarah arrived with coffee and news. "They're saying you were some kind of specialist," she said, setting the cups down in his kitchen. "Kane's men are spreading rumors about a secret FBI assassination team." "Not assassination," Michael corrected quietly. "Intervention. We handled situations that needed to disappear quietly." "We?" Michael studied his coffee. "I ran a unit, Special Activities Division. When criminal organizations got too powerful, too politically connected for normal law enforcement, we dealt with them. No publicity, no trials, just problems that went away." "What happened?" Sarah asked. "Why'd you leave?" Before he could answer, his surveillance system alerted him to movement. Kane's men were back at the Henderson place, unloading heavy weapons. From unmarked trucks, professional gear, military-grade explosives, Barrett sniper rifles, tactical communication systems. "Our last operation went bad," Michael continued, watching the screens. "Cartel had deep political connections, compromised officials. We were set up, my whole team." He paused. "I was the only one who made it out." "The Devils Horde," Sarah connected the dots. "They're not just a gang. They're connected to whoever betrayed you." Michael nodded. "Kane's ex-CIA probably worked with the same people who set us up. That's why they've got political protection, military equipment. On the monitors, more vehicles arrived at the Henderson place. Men in tactical gear, moving with military precision. Not bikers playing soldier. These were professional operators." "I chose this farm carefully," Michael explained. "Clear lines of sight, defensible positions, prepared for the day they finally found me. And now they have." "No," he smiled grimly. "They found what I wanted them to find. A quiet farmer who happened to have some federal training. Just enough to make them angry, make them sloppy." Sarah watched the screens, seeing the growing army at the Henderson place. "They're not looking sloppy now. That's the point. They'll come at me with everything they have, official resources, political connections, the same system they used to destroy my team." His voice hardened. "And this time, I'll have proof. Enough evidence to burn their whole network down." "You're using yourself as bait," Sarah realized, drawing them all in. Michael's phone buzzed with another message from his handler. "Satellite shows heavy hitters arriving. CIA Black Ops, private military contractors, whatever you're into, it's got their attention. They'll target you first," Michael told Sarah. "Try to use you and Emily to get to me. You need to leave town." "Like hell," she replied. "This is my home too. I'm not running." Before he could argue, his surveillance picked up a new arrival at the Henderson place. A helicopter, unmarked but military spec. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, someone Michael hadn't seen in 3 years. "Agent Collins," he breathed, "the CIA handler who set us up." Sarah squeezed his arm. "Then your trap worked. They're all coming." Michael watched Collins greeting Kane, both men studying maps of the area. They thought they were planning a simple assault on a troublesome ex-agent. Instead, they were walking into 3 years of careful preparation. "Shadow Protocol is still active," he mused. "That means everything I do is officially sanctioned, deniable but authorized." What does that mean? He turned to her. It means I don't have to hide anymore, don't have to play by their rules. His smile was cold. Kane brought exactly the right people to exactly the right place. Now we're going to finish what started 3 years ago. On the screens, Collins and Kane pointed toward Michael's farm, planning their attack. They had no idea they were being watched, no idea that every move they made was being recorded, documented, prepared as evidence. Shadow wasn't hiding anymore. Now, it was time to hunt. Cedar Valley transformed overnight. Black SUVs patrolled the streets, filled with men who moved like soldiers but dressed like civilians. Every rooftop held surveillance teams. Every business suddenly had new security consultants watching Michael's farm through high-powered optics. 14 sniper positions, Michael noted, marking them on his tactical display, plus mobile teams. They're establishing a complete surveillance net. His screen showed the full scope of their operation. The Devils Horde patches were gone, replaced by the subtle indicators of professional contractors. Kane and Collins weren't hiding their capabilities anymore. Local cell service is down, Sarah reported from the diner. Internet too. They're isolating us. Standard protocol, Michael replied. Cut communications, control information flow, prepare for deniable operations. His satellite feed showed more resources pouring in. Tactical vehicles disguised as farm equipment. Communication arrays hidden in grain silos. They were building a professional military operation right in the heart of farm country. A message from his old handler flashed, "Collins has authorization. Black budget activated. Whatever they're planning, it's officially unofficial." Michael watched Collins directing operations from the Henderson place. The CIA man hadn't changed, still wore expensive suits, still carried himself with that air of untouchable authority, still thought he controlled everything. "They've got the sheriff's department locked down," Sarah continued, "replaced all the deputies with their own people. Emily says even her teachers are being questioned." Through his thermal imaging, Michael tracked teams of operators moving through the town. Their patterns were precise, professional. This wasn't just show of force. They were mapping everything, preparing for full tactical operations. Multiple vehicles approaching, his system warned. A convoy of unmarked trucks rolled toward his farm, stopping just within view. Kane stepped out, now dressed in tactical gear instead of biker leather. Behind him, teams of operators began unloading equipment, not trying to hide their capabilities anymore. This was a show of force. "Last chance, Reeves," Kane called out. "You've got 1 hour to surrender. After that, we stop being nice." Michael watched through his scopes as they set up mobile command posts. Professional Combat Operations Center, satellite communications, the kind of gear reserved for serious government missions. "They're not even pretending anymore," Sarah observed through their secure line. "The whole town can see what they really are." "That's the point," Michael replied. "Show of force. Demonstrate that resistance is futile. Standard psychological warfare." His surveillance caught Collins making calls from the command post. Each call brought more resources. Helicopters landing in empty fields, unmarked vehicles, full of equipment, men with the hard eyes of professional killers. "Your old team," Sarah said quietly. "The ones who died. This is how it happened, isn't it?" Michael's jaw tightened. Similar setup, political protection, unlimited resources, overwhelming force. He checked his preparations one last time, but this time I'm ready for them. The convoy had transformed the road into a military-style forward operating base. Generator trucks powered sophisticated electronic warfare systems. Communications. Arrays reached into the sky. They were building the kind of operation used to take down terrorist compounds. "You knew they'd do this," Sarah realized. "You planned for it." "Every piece of equipment they bring is evidence," Michael confirmed. "Every operator they call in adds to the documentation. They think they're preparing to eliminate a problem. Instead, they're walking into a trap 3 years in the making." Kane's voice boomed through military-grade speakers. 50 minutes, Reeves. We've got enough firepower to level this whole valley. Don't make us use it. Michael's screens showed the full tactical picture. Dozens of operators, military-grade weapons, enough equipment for a small war. All focused on one small farm in the middle of nowhere, all playing right into his hands. Sarah, he said quietly, get everyone off the streets. When this starts, it's going to get complicated. The pieces were set. The trap was ready. Now it was just a matter of timing. Shadow was about to show them exactly why he'd been the FBI's most lethal tactical commander. Michael's first move wasn't what they expected. Instead of fortifying his position or preparing for direct confrontation, he walked calmly into town, straight past Kane's surveillance teams. The operators watched through their scopes, fingers on triggers, as he entered Sarah's diner. Bold move, Collins commented from his command post, or stupid. But Michael had chosen his timing carefully. Local news crews were arriving, drawn by rumors of paramilitary activity in farm country. Every camera turned to capture the scene. Heavily armed men surrounding a simple diner where farmers ate breakfast. "Morning, Michael," Sarah called out normally, though her eyes conveyed understanding. "Usual?" Through the windows he watched Kane's men trying to look inconspicuous, hiding their weapons, attempting to maintain their cover. But the news cameras were already capturing everything. "Getting crowded in town," Michael commented loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Lot of strange faces, military types, almost like someone's preparing for war." His phone transmitted everything to secure servers, conversations, facial recognition matches, surveillance data. Every operator they exposed was another piece of evidence. Kane burst in, trying to maintain his biker persona despite his tactical gear. "Having breakfast before the deadline, Reeves?" "Just coffee," Michael replied mildly. "Interesting equipment you've got out there. Not standard motorcycle club gear. More like CIA tactical operations kit, black budget stuff." Kane's face tightened as he noticed the news cameras outside. They couldn't risk violence in public, not with witnesses. Their whole operation required deniability. "You're playing a dangerous game," Kane growled quietly. "No game." Michael sipped his coffee. "Just making sure everything's documented, like those satellite communication arrays you're setting up, the ones requiring presidential authorization to deploy domestically." Collins appeared in the doorway, elegant suit out of place among the farmers. "Perhaps we should talk privately, Mr. Reeves." "Why privately?" Michael's voice carried. "Let's discuss how a motorcycle gang got access to classified military equipment, or why CIA operative Thomas Collins is running domestic operations without oversight." The diner had gone silent. Every farmer, every local watched the scene unfold. More news vans arrived outside, cameras rolling. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Collins said softly. "Actually," Michael stood, "you have no idea what you're dealing with. 3 years ago, you set up my team because we got too close to your operation. You thought you eliminated everyone who knew the truth." He moved toward the door, forcing Collins to step aside. "Check your secure communications. Check your classified channels. Check all the backup systems you think are safe. I've been preparing for this moment for a very long time." Kane's men reached for weapons, but couldn't risk using them. Not with cameras recording, witnesses watching, evidence building. 30 minutes left, Kane called after him. "Then nothing can protect you." Michael turned back, letting them see shadow in his eyes for the first time. "I don't need protection, but you might." He walked out past the news crews, past the surveillance teams, past the hidden operators trying to maintain their cover. His phone continuously transmitted data, documenting every face, every piece of equipment, every violation of federal law. Sarah's secure message came through. "They're scrambling. Collins is making calls, looking worried." "They should be worried," Michael replied. "Check your email." He'd sent her files, evidence of CIA domestic operations, black budget allocations, classified equipment deployments. Everything needed to expose their entire operation. If anything happens to me, he instructed, release everything. To every news outlet, every oversight committee, every watchdog organization. His surveillance system showed chaos at the command post. Collins was yelling into secure phones. Kane was ordering his men to find and eliminate all witnesses. Their careful operation was unraveling. You knew they couldn't risk exposure, Sarah realized. That's why you did it so publicly. They rely on shadows, Michael explained, on deniability. Take that away, they have to either back down or escalate dramatically. Which will they choose? Michael watched Collins storming back to his command post, rage visible even through the thermal imaging. They'll escalate. Their egos won't let them back down now. Isn't that dangerous? Very, he agreed. But it's also necessary. Sometimes, to catch predators, you have to make them so angry they forget to hide what they really are. The pieces were in motion. Now it was just a matter of waiting for their response. And when it came, Shadow would be ready. The attack came from all directions at once. No more pretense, no more hiding, just overwhelming force. 30 vehicles converged on Michael's farm, filled with heavily armed operators. Helicopters circled overhead, running dark. The whole valley echoed with the sound of war coming to farm country. "Time's up, Shadow!" Kane's voice boomed through military-grade speakers. "No more games!" Michael watched through his command center as they established textbook assault positions. Teams of operators moved with lethal precision, setting up kill zones, preparing for a coordinated breach. Their tactics were perfect, professional, exactly what he'd expected. "They've cut all communications," Sarah reported through their secure backup channel. "Power too. Town's completely dark." "They're getting sloppy," Michael replied calmly, "rushing their setup, making mistakes." His thermal imaging showed Collins directing operations from an armored command vehicle. The CIA man had traded his suit for tactical gear, personally coordinating the assault teams. The first attack came as a probing action, 4 teams hitting different sectors simultaneously. They moved like ghosts through the darkness, using state-of-the-art night vision and thermal imaging. But Michael's countermeasures were ready. Strobes fired at precisely calculated intervals, burning out their expensive optics. Hidden speakers projected conflicting thermal signatures, confusing their targeting systems. Every piece of their high-tech gear became a liability. "Fall back," Kane ordered as his first team stumbled blind. "Reset and reform." "Having equipment. Your problems." Michael's voice came through their own command frequencies. "Weird how that happens when you rush an operation." Collins grabbed the radio. "You can't hold out forever, Shadow. We've got an army out here." "Funny thing about armies," Michael replied. "They leave a lot of evidence, satellite footage, radio transmissions, equipment signatures, the kind of evidence that proves CIA black ops on domestic soil." The next attack was heavier, shaped charges against reinforced positions, sniper teams targeting defensive points, coordinated fire and movement. But Michael had spent 3 years preparing for exactly this. Remote charges disrupted their carefully planned assault lanes. Pre-positioned defenses channeled them into killing zones. Every tactic they attempted had been anticipated, prepared for, countered before they even began. "He's toying with us!" Kane raged as another team was forced to retreat. "No," Collins said quietly. "He's documenting everything. Every move we make adds to his evidence." A helicopter swooped low, running a thermal scan of the farm. Michael's systems immediately detected military-grade surveillance equipment, more proof of classified technology being used illegally. "You're not just fighting me," Michael broadcast on their command frequency. "You're fighting 3 years of preparation. Every contingency planned for, every response ready." His surveillance caught Collins making urgent phone calls, requesting more resources, more authorization, more support. But each call created another data point, another piece of evidence. "They're bringing up heavy weapons," Sarah warned. Military. Grade stuff. Things that'll level buildings. Good, Michael replied. The bigger the response, the more impossible to hide. Kane's voice thundered through the night. Last warning, Shadow. Surrender or we reduce that farm to ashes. Michael's cameras showed their positions. Over 50 operators now, armed with enough firepower for a small war. All focused on one small farm. All being recorded, documented, proven. Remember Bosnia? Michael asked over their command channel. The operation where we first met, Collins? Before you sold out, started working with the cartels. Collins' response was immediate. Burn it all. The night erupted in automatic weapons fire. Tracers lit up the darkness. Explosions shook the ground as they threw everything they had at the farm. But Michael had planned for this too. Sarah, he said calmly through their secure line, hit send. Across the country, evidence began flowing to news outlets, federal oversight committees, watchdog organizations. Proof of CIA domestic operations, black budget allocations, classified technology being used on American soil. It's done, Sarah confirmed. Everyone's getting it. Michael smiled in the darkness as his attackers continued their assault. They thought they were eliminating a threat. Instead, they were proving every accusation, confirming every piece of evidence. Shadow wasn't just fighting back. He was ending their whole operation, 3 years of patience finally paying off. The real war was just beginning. The farm erupted in flames, but not from the attackers' weapons. Michael had rigged the buildings himself, controlled demolitions that made it look like their assault was succeeding. As his attackers watched the inferno, thinking they'd won, he made his move. Target eliminated. Kane reported triumphantly. The farm's gone. Check again. Michael's voice came through their command net. Not from a remote speaker this time, from inside their own command vehicle. Collins spun around, to find Michael standing behind him, having somehow infiltrated their most secure position. Before anyone could react, he'd already disabled Kane and 2 guards with precise, brutal efficiency. Hello, Tom, Michael said calmly. It's been a while. How? Collins reached for his weapon, but froze as he felt cold steel against his neck. You really should have done better research, Michael continued, about who I was before the FBI, about why they recruited me specifically for shadow operations. Kane struggled to speak through a damaged throat. You're just a Fed... Actually, Michael smiled coldly. I was CIA first. Deep cover operations. The guy who taught you everything you know about tactical response, Tom. Remember your instructor at the farm? The one who wrote the manual you're using tonight? Collins's face went pale. Ghost instructor, you were the man who designed all your protocols, all your countermeasures. Everything you're trying to use against me? Michael nodded. I wrote those programs, built those systems, trained the people who trained you. Through the command vehicle's windows, they could see their assault teams still firing at the burning farm, unaware their leadership had been compromised. 3 years ago, Michael continued, when my FBI team got too close to your cartel operation, you thought you had every angle covered. But you forgot to check who designed the angles. Sarah's voice came through his earpiece. All files received and verified. Every major news outlet has the evidence. It's going live in 5 minutes. You're too late, Collins managed. We have containment protocols, media blackouts, nothing gets out. Michael's laugh was genuine. You're still using my old containment protocols? The ones with the backdoors I built in? Check your secure channels. Kane grabbed a radio, spinning through frequencies. Every channel carried the same message, detailed evidence of CIA domestic operations, black budget allocations to cartels, classified technology being used against American citizens. It's not just going to the media, Michael explained. Every Federal Oversight Committee, every watchdog group, every agency investigator who isn't on your payroll. The kind of evidence that not even your political connections can bury. Why? Collins studied his former instructor's face. Why wait 3 years? Because I needed all of you, every operator, every piece of equipment, every connection in your network. Michael's voice hardened. You killed my FBI team, but you're not just going to pay for that. You're going to help me expose the entire corrupt operation you're part of. Helicopter spotlights swept the burning farm as more tactical teams arrived, still unaware their command had been compromised. Your assets are being frozen, Michael continued. Your political allies are being indicted. Your entire black budget operation is being dragged into the light. And you did it all yourselves just to try to kill one troublesome farmer. Kane lunged forward, but Michael put him down with almost casual efficiency. The student never quite manages to beat the teacher, he told Collins, especially when the teacher wrote the book on everything you know. Outside, federal vehicles were arriving, real ones this time. The evidence had already sparked official response. The operation Collins and Kane had built so carefully was collapsing around them. Shadow's true identity wasn't just exposed. It was a weapon that had destroyed them more thoroughly than any tactical operation could have managed. The night exploded into chaos as Collins's carefully constructed operation imploded. Attack helicopters suddenly found their tactical frequencies jammed. Secure communications dissolved into static. Every piece of classified equipment they'd brought began turning against them. "Kill him!" Collins screamed, but his operators couldn't even approach the command vehicle. Michael had locked down their own security systems, trapping them outside while he controlled everything from within. "Your authentication codes are being cancelled," Michael informed him calmly, watching the screens. "Your emergency protocols are being reversed. Everything you built is being dismantled by the very systems you stole from my program." Kane tried to override the computer systems, but his commands were rejected. "How are you doing this?" "I designed the CIA's entire tactical response infrastructure," Michael explained, "built-in safeguards in case it was ever turned against American citizens, like you're doing now." Sarah's voice came through his earpiece. "Federal response teams are 10 minutes out, real ones." The evidence sparked an immediate investigation. Outside, Collins' operators were starting to realize something was wrong. Their tactical coordination was failing. Support systems were shutting down. The professional operation was dissolving into confusion. "You think this ends with us?" Collins snarled. "We're just one piece. The organization is bigger than you can imagine." "I'm counting on that," Michael replied. "You're not the target. You're the key to exposing everything, every connection, every corrupt official, every piece of the operation that killed my team." Kane lunged for a backup radio, managing to broadcast, "Scorched earth, burn everything." But Michael just smiled. "Your self-destruct protocols. Also mine. Check your equipment." The operators outside found their demolition charges deactivated. Weapon systems locked down. Even their vehicles refused to start. 3 years of Michael's planning had anticipated every contingency. "Federal agencies are investigating multiple locations," Sarah reported. "Based on the evidence, they're rolling up your entire network." Collins slumped in defeat. "You played us perfectly. Used our own arrogance against us." "No," Michael corrected. "I just had to be patient. Wait for you to bring all your resources, all your connections, all your illegal operations right here, where everything could be documented and exposed." Through the command vehicle's windows, they watched the operation falling apart. Operators were surrendering as federal vehicles arrived. The evidence was too overwhelming to fight. "The student becomes the teacher," Collins muttered. "But you've made yourself a target. They'll never stop hunting you now." "That's the point," Michael replied. "I'm not hiding anymore. Now I'm hunting them, all of them, using everything you so helpfully brought to my door." Kane made one last desperate move, triggering a hidden weapon, but Michael had anticipated that too. The former instructor's response was instant, efficient, final. "You still telegraph your moves," he told Kane's unconscious form, "just like you did in training." Sarah's voice was urgent. "Michael, they're trying to activate some kind of failsafe." "System. Let them," he said calmly. "Every attempt to cover this up just creates more evidence, more proof of how deep the corruption goes." The night lit up with red and blue lights as federal response teams arrived in force, not corrupt local officials this time, senior investigators responding to evidence too big to ignore. "It's really over?" Sarah asked. Michael watched Collins and Kane being taken into custody. "No, this is just the beginning. Now we start dismantling everything they're part of. All of it." The farmer's peaceful disguise was gone. Shadow wasn't just revealed. He was fully unleashed, and a lot of corrupt officials were about to learn why he'd been the CIA's most feared tactical instructor. Michael's surveillance network lit up like a Christmas tree. Black SUVs and unmarked vans were converging on Cedar Valley from every direction. Not CIA this time, private military contractors, mercenaries, everyone on the corrupt organizations. In payroll, they're burning all their assets, he explained to Sarah, watching the tactical display. Everyone who could expose them is being activated for one final strike. His system identified facial matches, former special forces, ex-intelligence, operators, blacklisted military personnel, the kind of people who did the dirtiest work for the highest bidders. "Satellite shows 6 helicopter gunships incoming," Sarah reported from her makeshift command post in the diner's basement. "Military grade, the kind that shouldn't exist on US soil." Michael nodded, pleased. "They're desperate, making mistakes, bringing in equipment that proves everything we've accused them of." His phone buzzed with a message from his old handler. "Shadow, you've kicked the hornet's nest. Senior officials being arrested. Political connections scrambling. They're coming. With everything they've got." Through his thermal imaging, Michael watched teams of operators setting up around the valley. Their tactics were aggressive, sloppy, none of the careful precision Collins had shown. These were killers unleashed, told to eliminate the threat at any cost. "Local police are being ordered to stand down," Sarah said. "Federal response is being delayed by administrative issues. They're trying to buy time." "Of course they are." Michael checked his preparations one last time. "How many civilians still in town?" "Most evacuated when we warned them. The rest are in the shelter under the church. Emily's helping keep people calm." Michael's screens showed more forces arriving. Armored vehicles poorly disguised as construction equipment, weapon systems that violated multiple international treaties. They were bringing in enough firepower to level a small city. A new message from his handler. Confirmed. "Task Force X is incoming. Black Ops Wetwork Team. They're authorized to wipe the whole valley to contain this." "Good," Michael replied. "The more scorched earth they try, the more evidence they create." His surveillance caught radio transmissions between the mercenary teams. They were coordinating a massive assault, planning to hit everything simultaneously. No witnesses, no evidence, no survivors. "Michael," Sarah's voice was tight. "There's something else. These transmissions, they're talking about a neutron bomb. Something about clearing the valley without destroying infrastructure. Now that's interesting." Michael smiled grimly. "Proof of illegal WMDs on American soil. That'll bring in oversight that even they can't stop." He watched their forces continue to gather. Every piece of classified technology they deployed, every illegal weapon they brought in, every unauthorized operator they activated, all of it was being recorded, documented, transmitted to secure locations. "They're really going to do it," Sarah realized. "They're going to try to wipe Cedar Valley off the map." "That's the plan," Michael agreed, "but they don't realize they're walking into a trap 3 years in the making. Everything they're bringing, every piece of equipment, every operator, every illegal order, it's all part of the evidence trail." His screen showed the full tactical picture. Over 200 operators in position, gunships circling just beyond radar range. Enough firepower to start a small war, all focused on eliminating one man who knew too much. Final preparations complete, Sarah reported. All civilians secured, emergency protocols in place. We're as ready as we'll ever be. Michael did one last check of his systems. Everything was in place. Countermeasures, recording devices, evidence-gathering tools. The corrupt organization thought they were coming to bury their secrets. Instead, they were about to expose everything. Sarah, he said quietly, if this goes wrong, it won't, she interrupted. You've planned for everything, prepared for every contingency. If it does, he continued, there's a fail-safe, special authentication codes. They'll expose everything, bring the whole corrupt system down. His tactical display showed the mercenary teams making final preparations, weapon systems powering up, communications channels aligning. The night was about to erupt into carefully documented chaos. It won't come to that, Sarah assured him. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for all of us, for Cedar Valley, for justice. Michael watched the forces gathering against him. In a way, this was what he'd been training for his whole career. Every operation, every mission, every lesson learned, it had all led to this moment. Shadow was about to show them exactly why he'd been the most feared tactical instructor in CIA history. The final countdown had begun. The mercenaries' final ultimatum came at midnight. Their commander's voice boomed across Cedar Valley. This is your last warning. Surrender, Shadow, or we sterilize the entire area. You have 10 minutes to comply. Michael watched their preparations through his surveillance network. They'd positioned their neutron device in an armored truck surrounded by elite operators. Gunships maintained holding patterns just outside town. Strike teams took up final assault positions. They're really going to do it, Sarah whispered through their secure line. Use a WMD on American soil. That's what makes them predictable, Michael replied, checking his systems. They're so focused on covering up their crimes, they'll commit even bigger ones. His tactical display showed the full scope of their operation. Teams of operators in precise formations, heavy weapons positioned for maximum coverage. Electronic warfare systems ready to block all communications. A textbook military assault 2 textbook. All civilians confirmed in the shelter? He asked. Yes, Emily's keeping everyone calm, but Michael, those gunships, the neutron bomb. Can you really stop all of this? He smiled, remembering teaching these same tactics at the CIA training facility. They're using my own playbook, following protocols I designed, making exactly the mistakes I built into the system. His screens showed more mercenaries arriving, elite operators with cutting-edge equipment. They moved with professional precision, but their tactics were predictable. Standard responses to standard scenarios. 5 minutes, the commander announced. Choose your next move carefully, Shadow. Michael's phone lit up with a message from his handler. Shadow, this is bigger than we thought. Task Force X is being commanded directly by Senator Morrison. The corruption goes all the way to the intelligence committee. Perfect, Michael replied. The more authority they commit, the more evidence we gather. His surveillance caught radio transmissions between the mercenary teams. They were coordinating their final attack plan, synchronizing their watches, preparing to unleash hell on Cedar Valley. But they didn't realize every transmission was being recorded, every order documented, every illegal action captured and transmitted to secure locations across the country. Initial breach teams in position, Sarah reported, monitoring their movements. Michael, they're setting up thermobaric weapons, like they used in urban warfare overseas. They want to make sure nothing survives, he confirmed. No witnesses, no evidence, just a tragic accident that destroyed a small farming town. Through his thermal imaging, he watched the mercenary commanders gathering for final coordination. Their confidence was obvious. They thought overwhelming force would solve everything, just like Collins had thought, just like they all thought. 2 minutes. The commander's voice carried threat and certainty. Last chance to prevent unnecessary casualties. Michael made his final checks. Every system was ready, every trap prepared, every piece of evidence, gathering equipment in place. 3 years of planning was about to pay off. Sarah, he said quietly, whatever happens next, remember, everything is being recorded. Everything is evidence. Don't let them bury the truth. They won't, she promised. Cedar Valley won't go quietly. We won't let them hide their crimes anymore. His tactical display showed the mercenaries tensing for assault. Weapon systems powered up, communications aligned, strike teams ready to breach. They had no idea they were about to attack the man who'd literally written their training manuals. 1 minute, the commander announced. Prepare for scorched earth protocol. Michael watched them through his screens, remembering each lesson he'd taught at the farm. Every tactic they were using, every response they'd been trained to make, and every fatal flaw he'd built into their protocols. This is what I trained for, he told Sarah. Not just the tactical operations, not just the undercover work. Everything in my career led to this moment. His surveillance showed the full attacking force, over 200 operators, gunships, armored vehicles, illegal weapons. All the resources of a corrupt system gathered to eliminate one threat, all about to learn why Shadow had been the CIA's deadliest tactical instructor. 30 seconds! The commander's voice held anticipation. Strike teams, final positions! Michael's finger hovered over his command console. Years of preparation, years of planning, years of waiting for them to expose themselves. The storm was about to break over Cedar Valley, and Shadow was ready to teach them all one final lesson. The attack began with precision strikes from the gunships, or at least that's what the mercenaries intended. But when they triggered their weapon systems, nothing responded. Every targeting computer, every fire control system, every piece of advanced technology suddenly displayed the same message. Protocol Shadow activated. What's happening? The commander's voice crackled with rage. Override it! Override everything! They can't. Michael's voice came through their own command frequencies. Everything you brought, every weapon, every system, every piece of classified tech, it all has my backdoors built in, written into the original code, designed to prevent exactly this kind of domestic operation. The gunships were forced to land, their systems completely locked out. But the ground teams pressed forward, switching to manual weapons, determined to complete their mission through brute force. Kill him, the commander ordered. Do it the old-fashioned way. Strike teams breached from multiple directions, using textbook tactics, exactly the tactics Michael had designed years ago, which meant he knew every counter, every weakness, every flaw in their approach. The first team hit hidden sonic weapons that disrupted their tactical coordination. The second found their night vision equipment suddenly amplifying light signals, blinding them at crucial moments. The third triggered electromagnetic pulses that fried their communications gear. Having equipment problems? Michael's voice taunted through their failing radios. That's what happens when you use stolen military tech against its own failsafes. But these were skilled operators. They adapted quickly, switching to basic weapons and manual signals. Teams of hardened mercenaries pressed forward through the chaos, determined to reach their target. All units converge, the commander ordered. Overwhelm him with numbers. That's when Michael sprung his real trap. Every piece of evidence they'd brought, every illegal weapon, every classified system, every unauthorized operator, was being broadcast live. Surveillance drones he'd hidden around the valley transmitted everything to news outlets, federal authorities, and oversight committees. Check your phones, he told the attackers. You're all live on national news. Every illegal action, every unauthorized weapon, every operator's face. The mercenaries' tactical discipline began to crack as they realized the truth. They weren't just failing their mission, they were exposing everything their corrupt masters had tried to hide. Bring up the neutron device. The commander's voice held desperation now. Wipe it all out! But when they tried to access the weapon, they found more of Michael's surprises. The arming codes were reversed, the fail-safes activated. The same backdoors he'd built into every piece of classified tech were now sealing their doom. Fun fact, about that bomb. Michael's voice carried cold amusement. I designed its security protocols too. Right now, it's transmitting its location to every federal agency, proving you brought a WMD to American soil. Sarah's voice came through his secure channel. Federal response teams are mobilizing. Real ones. They can't cover this up anymore. The mercenaries began to break formation, their professional coordination dissolving. Some tried to flee, others attempted to destroy evidence, but everything was already transmitted, documented, exposed. Hold. Your positions, the commander screamed. Complete the mission. Michael watched through his surveillance as their attack degraded into chaos. Strike teams accidentally engaged each other in the confusion. Command structure collapsed as operators realized they were being recorded committing federal crimes. But the commander wasn't finished. He led his elite unit, hardened killers who didn't care about evidence or exposure, in a final push toward Michael's position. These were men who'd done the darkest wet work, who couldn't afford to leave witnesses. Time to earn our pay, the commander growled. Do it the hard way. They moved like shadows through the chaos, avoiding the high-tech traps, relying on pure skill and savagery. This was what they were truly trained for, up close, personal, lethal, but they'd forgotten who had trained them. Michael met them in close combat, every move calculated, every response prepared. He'd taught them these techniques, knew their strengths, their weaknesses, their tendencies. The first operator went down to a throat strike he never saw coming. The second fell to his own knife, turned against him by the man who'd developed these close-quarter tactics. The third and fourth attacked together, perfect coordination, but Michael flowed between them like smoke, using their own momentum to destroy them. Remember this lesson? He asked as they fell. From advanced close combat training, about how perfection becomes predictable. The commander himself engaged last, desperate and deadly. They fought with brutal efficiency, each knowing the other's capabilities. But Michael had planned for this too. You're good, he told the commander as they grappled. But you're using techniques I designed, fighting exactly how I trained you to fight. The commander's strikes became wilder, sloppier. We'll never stop. There will always be more. Count on it, Michael replied, ending the fight with precise finality. That's why I'm not hiding anymore. Around them, the operation had completely collapsed. Mercenaries surrendered as federal teams finally arrived. Evidence of their illegal mission was already making headlines. The corrupt organization's careful secrecy was shattered. Sarah's voice held triumph. They're rolling up everything, Senator. Morrison arrested. Intelligence Committee members in custody. The whole network is exposed. Michael watched through his surveillance as the truth unfolded. 3 years of patience, 3 years of planning, 3 years of waiting for them to bring all their resources, all their illegal operations, all their corruption right where he needed it. Shadow protocol complete, he transmitted to his old handler. Mission accomplished. The morning sun rose over Cedar Valley, revealing the aftermath. Captured mercenaries, documented evidence, exposed corruption. The quiet farmer's careful trap had sprung perfectly. Was it worth it? Sarah asked as federal agents swarmed the area. 3 years of hiding? Playing the simple farmer? Michael watched the prisoners being loaded into vehicles, the evidence being catalogued, the truth finally coming to light. They killed my team, he said quietly. Corrupted the system we'd sworn to protect. Used our own tactics against American citizens. His smile was cold. So yes, worth every minute. The storm had passed, but Shadow's work wasn't finished. There would be more corrupt officials to expose, more illegal operations to dismantle, more justice to deliver. Cedar Valley had been just the beginning. Now the real harvest could start. Cedar Valley worked to rebuild over the next few weeks. The bullet holes were patched, the burned buildings repaired, the scars of battle slowly erased. But the town itself was forever changed, just like the quiet farmer who had defended it. Michael stood in his newly rebuilt barn, watching federal agents catalog the last pieces of evidence. The investigation had expanded far beyond the original corrupt network, exposing decades of illegal operations and compromised officials. "They're calling it the biggest intelligence scandal in history," Sarah said, bringing him his usual coffee. "Senator Morrison's testimony is implicating half of Washington." Michael nodded, checking his surveillance feeds out of habit. The screens showed normal farm activity now, tractors in fields, cattle in pastures, the peaceful rhythm of agricultural life. "The Devils Horde case broke everything open," she continued. "Kane turned state's evidence. Collins is naming names. The whole corrupt system is unraveling." Through his window, Michael watched Emily playing with other local kids. The fear that had gripped Cedar Valley was gone, replaced by a new sense of security. The community had faced evil together and emerged stronger. "Will you stay?" Sarah asked, quietly. "Now that your mission is done." Michael considered the farm he'd chosen so carefully, the fields he'd worked for 3 years, the community that had stood with him when the truth came out. "Shadow's work isn't finished," he replied. "There are more corrupt networks to expose, more illegal operations to shut down, but," he smiled, "but a good tactical position is worth keeping, and Cedar Valley's proven itself worth defending." His secure phone buzzed with new intelligence. More corrupt officials trying to hide their crimes, more illegal operations that needed to be exposed. The work would never really end. Besides, he added, someone needs to grow the corn. Sarah laughed, understanding what he meant. This was his home now, his real life, not just a cover. The quiet farmer and the lethal operative had become one person. "The FBI's expanded their oversight division," she said, "created new protocols to prevent this kind of corruption. They're calling them the Shadow Protocols." Michael watched the sun setting over his fields, the same view he'd watched for 3 years, but now he could enjoy it without having to hide who he was, without having to pretend to be less than he was. "Good harvests take time," he said finally. "Whether you're growing corn or exposing corruption, the key is patience, careful preparation, and knowing exactly when to reap what you've sown." Sarah squeezed his hand, and together they watched evening settle over Cedar Valley. The town had seen the darkness that could hide behind authority, but also the good that could be done by those willing to stand against it. The quiet farmer would keep growing his corn, and Shadow would keep watching, keep waiting, keep defending what mattered. Some harvests were worth any price.